meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will be subsequently broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. Are there any councillors who wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1? I know we've got Councillor Yates. Do you wish to speak on any agenda item?
I'd imagine it depends on the questions. So if you'd allow me some flexibility to come in if there's a particular issue of interest, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, I've received apologies from Councillor Bright, but we also have Councillor Packman, we have Councillor Britcher, and we also have a fourth councillor, yes, Councillor Dabro. We have Councillor Matterface and Councillor Harry Scobie subbing. Are there any other apologies? Nope. Okay. Are there any, agenda item 2, are there any declarations of interest? Nope. Okay. Agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of November 2023. Does anybody have any questions about the minutes? And if not, can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Davis has proposed. Councillor Garner has seconded. Are members agreed? Okay, just give me 1 second to sign these. Thank you, members. Moving on to agenda item 4, we have the Q3 review, 2023-24, Treasury Management and Annual Investment Strategy. Over to you, Mr. Sanham.
Thank you, Chair. This report summarises the Treasury Management activity and prudential and Treasury indicators up to the end of Q3 for 23-24. The report covers where we are at the end of Q3 with regards to key indicators, and as a result, the following represents the key reporting items to consider. The regulatory environment places responsibility on members for the review and scrutiny of Treasury management policy and activities. This report is therefore important in that respect, as it provides details of the 23-24 position for Treasury activities. The main items for consideration this evening are for 23-24, the 9-month capital expenditure on long-term assets was 12 million spend, 10 million at this point last year against what is a £60 million budget for the year. The projected underspend includes the following relatively large projects. I've covered this in an element of detail because previously this has come up in terms of the significance of the underspend and slippage on the capital schemes. So from a general fund perspective, there's the housing assistance policy, which is effectively 2 million underspent. The majority of the forecast expenditure is on providing disabled facility grants to local residents. Final spend is dependent upon local need and timing of providing the grant assistance. It is anticipated that any underspend at year end will be available to be carried forward into the next financial year. Secondly, public toilet refurbishment and renewal. There's a capital budget underspend of 666,000 forecast at present. Funding has now been identified which will allow for investment in these facilities to be planned as per the 14th of December Cabinet report. Office accommodation, £3 million underspend. Accommodation requirement is still under review given the scope and flexible working as highlighted by COVID. The fourth item is the Broadstairs Flood and Coast Protection Scheme, which is 836,000 forecast underspend. This project is now forecast to start in spring to avoid disturbing winter birds, which is why there is slippage. The fifth item is the Westbrook and St Mildred seawall work, which is just under £500,000 forecast underspend, and that's because the Environment Agency funding is not yet confirmed for that project. It won't start until the funding is actually confirmed. Homelessness accommodation phase 2, there's £1 million forecast underspend. It is likely that there won't be any capital spend for a suitable site in 23-24. That budget again will be slipped into the next financial year to secure accommodation at that point. There's then the infrastructure project, which is the works to effectively Bankston Road Depot. It's a multi-year project with phased and it's flexible. The main balance after that, which because you can see that doesn't come to anywhere near the slippage in the capital programme, is for HRA schemes, which is predominantly new build programme. Over and above this, the council's gross debt, also called the borrowing position at the 31st December, was 19 million. Similar, very similar to where we were at the same time the previous year. The Council's underlying need to borrow to finance its capital expenditure, also called the capital financing requirement, is estimated to be 78 million as per the 24-25 Treasury Management Strategy. It was at 52 million in the previous year. The Council has held less gross debt than its capital finance requirement and accordingly has complied with the requirement not to exceed its authorised borrowing limit of 101 million. As at the 31st of December 23, the Council's investment balance was 56.8 million, very similar to the 55.4 held at the same time the previous year. Governance and Audit Committee are asked to note and make any comments as appropriate to the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sanham, apologies. Do any members have any questions or comments? Yes.
Thanks. Thanks, Matthew. Just one question on the public toilets. Does the money that's now going to be allocated for the refurbishment include the 250,000 that was promised from Southern Water? Is that in those figures? Do we know if that money is going to be forthcoming?
Yes, so there was a 250 allocation of potential external funding, so subject to confirmation by them, it would be included within those figures. Yeah. But there was so this report is the capital programme as was approved. There was a separate report taken to Cabinet that actually identifies the breakdown of the spend, which is the December report that was referred to. So you could refer back to that one if you want in terms of the actual detail, or I can send it to you.
Just want to know if they're going to cough up the money.
Not 100% confirmed at this point.
Confirmed, right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Towning.
I mean, this work that we're talking about, is this the same sort of budget that we talked about before, of the when we had a meeting earlier on, relating to the actual refurbishment of the toilets, that limited to a certain number of toilets only, or as it's an underspend, are we taking on more toilets to refurb or not?
This report talks about the specific allocation in terms of capital budget. The other paper that was taken identified a number of toilets that were down for refurbishment as a phased approach. So this isn't new, this is not new schemes over and above that was included in that December report.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, if members are happy to note the report, can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Towning has proposed and Councillor Donaldson has seconded. Are members agreed to note? Thank you very much.
Chair, can I just interject? Just in relation to 20.1, I just want to clarify that permission has to be given for the question prior to the commencement of debate, just to confirm that that's the position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So if you do wish to speak, Councillor Yates, you need to probably let us know before the report is introduced, please. Okay, moving on to agenda item 5, the corporate risk report. Amy Jackson, can you please provide us with your report?
Thank you, Chair. Yep, hello everybody. Thank you. So here we are again with the corporate risk report. So just to give you a bit of a refresh, the Council does monitor and manages its corporate risk through the corporate risk register and the service risk registers as well. The contents of the report highlight the high priority corporate risks and show the arrangements in place to ensure these risks are monitored and managed appropriately. Once I've completed going through the corporate risk register and any questions after that, we can then go on to the annexed risk report. Just to note, this report represents a position at the end of around about December and January, and as such is just a snapshot of the position at that time. So I think members can see that there hasn't been any movement on the corporate risk scoring. This time the risks all remain the same, there hasn't been any movement at all. I do know that feedback has been provided on all of the corporate risks this time, so really it was just to highlight that that is just the absolute update that we have, and so I can't really add anything else to that at this present time, so it's now over to you for your questions.
Okay, any member wants to start with this? I have some questions, but I'm happy to let another member go first. No? Okay. So I had a few questions around the report. I was interested that when we were doing the training before, we've put down the impact at level 4 of being an impact on the council costing more than £500,000.
Yeah.
Now, what my question was around methodology on this. there's quite a few risks that could impact the council greater than that. But when we're looking at the impact of that, do we look at it from the perspective of being unplanned or without reserves to cover that? So, for example, if there was, say, you're looking at the risk around the Environmental Act, which is sort of 4.10 on page 35, if we've anticipated some of that cost spend and we've started to mitigate it, would you still consider that a 4 and the financial impact, even if we've started to flesh that out a little bit?
Thank you. That, in a lot of respects, will be down to the risk owner, whoever completes this, to let us know how they've come to that scoring. And again, I think this harks back to what we were saying about the mitigations, need to be clearer on the report with more delineation. I would certainly suggest that any impacts over a certain amount should be classed as a 4 reserves or not, and the reserves potentially would be part of the mitigation, which potentially would take that score down. I do feel that that's why we do need to get the risks and the risk journey more clearly defined on the report, so that these sorts of questions would already be answered within the report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, to come in on that one specifically on the Environment Act, I think the score reflects the amount we know for certain about the implications of the Environment Act. So DEFRA have delayed the implementation of a lot of it, things like the deposit return scheme and the extended producer responsibility part. And there is progress being made, so they've appointed a scheme administrator, and we're waiting to understand exactly what that means. I mean, at the moment, the way the waste pathway is set up, we're the collection authority. We pass the waste to the disposal authority, which is KCC, and we receive a payment back from KCC for the recycling. That process will change, and it's that financial risk of how that will change and how whether the value of that payment, which will come through the extended producer responsibility scheme, will differ. And until we know more, that's why it's at that level. So I would expect, or I would hope that to reduce with time when we understand more and we can put in place measures and mitigations. But at the moment, that's why it's there.
Thank you, Chair. I think the answer is it depends. Sorry. In general terms, I'd say we'd be looking at the net position after any external funding or anything else that comes in to look at what the actual impact is on the council. With reserves, again, that's a bit grey. It would depend if there is a specific reserve that we've set aside to mitigate that risk. If it already is, say, for example, we put money aside for replacement cremator burners, we wouldn't necessarily consider that. That's planned, and we know we're going to use that in the future to an extent. However, if it's a risk that's come a bit left field, we haven't got any money set aside from it, and we're going to have to take money from reserves, I would be saying that's part of the impact, because that's just been taken from the council's overall pot of money.
That's helpful. Councillor Munns.
Just looking at the risk register and cyber attacks, the top one, I know we're going to talk about it, but it says change no. Well, we did have a cyber attack because the systems were unavailable, so something has changed. And there must be a cost associated to that issue we had a few weeks ago, and that's not listed in that change either. So I'm trying to understand how that gets managed.
And I think to a large extent, I may have to take some responsibility for that. There's been a real debate going on for the past couple of months about how to bring this report back to here, bearing in mind that the extraordinary meeting we had in January was cancelled because we had a real incident, and trying to bring officers in. And I think what we've tried to do is try and find the balance between bringing the audit report back here under exclusion of the press and public, but potentially delaying the discussion around the risk rating and any changes until our next meeting in July, so then we can have a more full discussion around the incident, the after action reviews, and some of the mitigation that may come out of the Cabinet Advisory Group that's been set up. So I'll let Amy come in on this in a second, because this is her report, but in terms of why there's maybe no change to reference the specifics of what's happened, is we felt that that's not a good use of time when this will come back again properly in July, and there is a Cabinet Advisory Group. Amy, did you want to come in? Sorry.
Yeah, I would reflect that, and I think as well no change also just reflects that there's no change to the actual scoring, because the scoring's right at the top level, so there is no change to the scoring. And I think, as we were saying earlier in the meeting, of course, when we look at maybe tweaking this risk report and actually giving you more of the mitigations, hopefully that would then, so that would be a change to the risk, because we've got different mitigations, but of course the scoring does remain the same as it did last time. So that's where I believe the no change part comes from my estimation.
Sorry, but can I just come back? But there would be there was a financial implication, whether you call it a loss or not, it's how you manage the figures. But there was a financial impact, and surely that should be recorded, because we've got, as part of that risk rating, a potential financial overhead.
Yeah, I mean, again, I believe this is an item that will be discussed later on in this meeting, so I'm not sure how much I could possibly add to that right now.
I think I'll bring you in just in a second, Matt, but I do think we'll probably pick this up under exclusion of the press and public, so we can talk a bit more broadly, if that's okay. Do you want to come in, Matt?
Thank you, Chair. And as a more simple response, this is a snapshot in time at the end of December. There was no cyber incident pre-December, and this report reports the position up to the end of December. Otherwise, we would constantly be changing the reports for the most up-to-date information. So it is a snapshot in time, which is why the rest of it is being covered under separate heading in this meeting.
Just to confirm, we will have a full debate and discussion about this. I think members will be very aware that this is very much a passion project of mine, and I know it is of yours as well. So we will be discussing this, but it's got to be at the right time. And bearing in mind that we are not a budget setting committee, we're not the scrutiny committee, so we don't want to replicate discussions that may be happening elsewhere. I had some more questions, but if anybody else wanted to come in at this point? No? So linked to the discussion that we had just before around what a 4 impact looks like in the mitigation, one of the bits, again, that I don't fully understand at the moment is the council's insurance position, and again, how that's potentially mitigating some of these risks. So I'll give you for example, and this is very much coming from a private sector view, so I would be interested to learn. Most businesses will have director and officer insurance, which includes a provision that if there is a settlement for a director or officer leaving the business, that part of that settlement would be paid for by the insurance. Now, the council over the last few years has had a number of high-profile exits, and I was interested, for example, when this risk was on the risk register, was any of those costs potentially being mitigated by insurance?
Thank you, Chair. I can tell you that prior to the risk strategy being changed at the end of 2022, we didn't have the same process in place. And I can also tell you that I've not been approached to make any claims under the D&O, so no provisions have been made under that, unfortunately, in terms of any settlements.
Okay, interesting. And then more sort of broad question. What's the process that you go through to identify future risks? I'm assuming some of that is internal, coming from department heads. What do you use externally to gather information about future risks?
I mean, this is something that we're developing at the moment, Chair, in terms of how people manage their identification of future risks. As I think we said in the previous presentation, we are looking at things like risk forecasting. We'd be looking at upcoming legislative changes, which especially would affect on some of our departments. It's, in a way, not exact science. We are still developing the way that we look at our risk, and so as time goes along, what we can see is that future risks are changing into emerging risks. This sometimes gives us a pattern, so it helps us to develop what we're looking for in the future for risks, because we have similar risks that are developed further. So I think that every department's going to have a different way of looking at future risks because of the service and because of what they do. When I'm training it out to people, it's more asking them to think about what they have coming up, what projects they have coming up. Have there been any papers released by the government that may have legislative implications to their service? And then beyond that, and then what we're also doing is looking on the risk registers every cycle, and I'm speaking to them about future risks. We're looking at challenging, we're looking to challenge them on mitigations going forwards. So it's a moving feast, it's a developing picture as we go along. And of course, I'd really welcome any feedback as well. If anyone has got anything on that they can, you know, we can benefit from, absolutely would love to hear that.
So, Councillor Towning first, then I'll come to you, Councillor Davis. Yes, Councillor Manners, apologies. Sorry.
I don't think we're going to live that one down. Yeah, it was on when you actually just jogged a thing with the when you're talking about the employment side of things. Have we ever looked at having insurance or a retained legal team which comes with insurance for constructive and unfair dismissal claims, and also for the management of disciplinary proceedings with any errant employees where that needs professional management? There are companies that offer that, legal firms that offer that service to large employers, where you actually know you can quantify, obviously because you're paying them a retainer to do so, you know you can reduce your risk of a massive severance payment that we've seen several of recently, because they take that risk on for us in return for having for being the first port of call in terms of with HR grievances or complaints or disputes. So I just wondered if that had ever been looked at as a way of managing risk there.
Yeah, Chris, do you want to come in?
We've, through the experience we had with the exit of the previous corporate management team, we did incur quite significant legal costs, as councillors will be aware. We were using a London-based legal firm, and they come with very expensive bills. Subsequently, after the event, we're now liaising, and we engage with Girlings, who are a more local firm, and I can say their rates are far more reasonable, and we use them to advise us on a number of sort of employee-related matters.
I was thinking more, I think the company that comes to mind is Peninsula, who I think are based up in Manchester, and they basically insure you. As long as you follow their procedures, they pay any unfair dismissal or constructive dismissal claims in full, and any severance payments they will pay in full as long as you followed their strictures, rules and strictures. So there is a total elimination of risk in return for a monthly fee or their retainer. Whereas obviously with retaining separate legal representation for employment disputes is obviously a good way to manage risk, I suspect. But obviously they don't pick up the bill if they lose. Whereas I'm asking if we considered using a legal representation which has that offers the insurance, where they pick up the tab for any payments if you do lose at a tribunal.
Not to my knowledge, Councillor Manners, that we have had an arrangement like that in the past, but it's something I'm happy to take away and explore to see if it would be an arrangement would be suitable for a local authority. Obviously, we have certain policies that we have to follow in terms of employee and employment sort of procedures, which may or may not be compatible with the requirements of an insuring firm. But I'm happy to take that away and report back to a future meeting.
Great. I don't know whether there is that cover available to local authorities, but if it can be investigated, then great.
Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. And then just to finish off on Barry's last point, Lloyds will normally underwrite most things if the premium's big enough. But a very simple question for once for me, actually, and it's simply to clarify, because I'm trying to avoid situations in the future where Amy in particular gets deluged. Is there, or could we establish some form of, even if it was a wall, where members could log a concern about a project or a process that they identify or perceive a risk, to report back to you, put it on, as I say, it could be a bulletin board. It doesn't have to be, I'm trying not to deluge you with
in a way, a more relaxed form of a councillor's risk register, maybe?
Yeah,
Potentially.
a feedback
relaxed
form,
councillors,
because there are,
wonderful.
members vary across the
Okay.
chamber. Some will be interested and some are more
Yeah.
interested than others. But, sorry.
Yeah, there may, I'll bring the monitoring officer in a second, because I believe there are mechanisms in the Constitution, I think it's called a councillor call for action, that allows individual councillors to raise issues of concern. I think it's similar in a way to a whistleblowing policy, but it obviously is different because we're not employees. Ingrid, putting you on the spot, would you want to come in here and just explain that a little bit?
Can I check the Constitution and come back to you? I'm not aware of that provision currently. Apologies.
I believe from one of the many times I've read the Constitution that, and people actually believe that. I believe that there are mechanisms in there for councillors to flag up concerns about particular issues, and I do believe it has happened in the last 5 or 6 years. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Garner's aware of it.
As I say, I hope I'm not going over old ground, but just trying to make a positive suggestion here, and also anything that gives better communication will obviously, is to everybody's benefit, basically.
I'm sure Ingrid will be happy. Are you happy to agree to sort of look into that and email the committee?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. And then I had just one more question, and this is a bugbear of mine, and I've raised it a couple of times in the committee in the past around we run a 5x5 risk matrix at the moment, which includes 0. And so we have risks on there that we're saying have a 0 likelihood or a 0 impact, potentially. And what that means is that at the top level, you have several risks that score very highly, and it's difficult to differentiate between them. And then you have, in theory, some risks scoring very low because there's 0. My view is that we should move to a 5x5 risk matrix that scores 1 to 5, which would give some more granularity of detail. Now, we had this discussion at the pre-meet, and Christine Parker, who isn't here this evening, made the point around how in a 5x5 risk matrix you can sometimes have everything scoring a 3 or a 4 because nobody wants to, or you just have groupthink that everything comes together. But I do think for the risks that we're talking about, that may give us some variation in scores. So I'd just be interested whether there's anything planned in the background to make any changes around the risk matrix.
I have discussed this at length with Christine Parker. I've also discussed it with Chris at length. I've investigated other councils' risk management strategies and the different matrix they use. We do use just a 1 to 4 system. There is no 0 on our risk matrix, so it is just 1 to 4, and which is indicative on the matrix that we have in the corporate risk report. I have looked into this for you, Chair, and after consideration we felt that this may well dilute the risk scoring, which I think is something you've just alluded to. The 4x4 matrix that we currently use does push away from the model, for the middle. So what it does is it gives you a clearer risk picture in terms of the actual where it falls one side of the line, whether it's on the annex risk, whether it's on the corporate risk register. This really supports the risk strategy that we've got in place at the moment to become more proactive. Also, the other consideration, this is really not within the service plan delivery. We've only really just implemented this current risk matrix. It's finally been embedded into all of the members, so all of the members that input into there. It would mean rewriting this quite significantly because of the way that we'd be asking to look at the risk and score the risk. More than happy to look at starting something like this next year, but for now it probably wasn't something that we were looking to do. However, we do concede that potentially the reports, as we've already discussed today, don't go far enough sometimes for members to get the right overview, hence why we have discussed delineating the mitigations on the corporate risk report so that you can see the risk journey. But after consideration, we did feel that the current model, given everything that I've just said, would be the best model to stick with for the rest of this current year, and we can certainly look to change that next year. And I don't know if Chris would like to add anything to that as well, given the conversations we've had.
If I may, Chair. No, Amy, I think you've covered that off very well. There is, as Amy rightly said, quite a lot of work that's gone into rolling out the current strategy, and I'm very mindful of the risk for sort of change fatigue with officers at the moment. Nonetheless, happy to look at this again in a year's time to see if there's merit in moving to a different structure of the risk matrix. I think what we really want to do, as Amy said, is, and as you've said as well, Chair, focus on some more of the high-level risks, but have some richer information in there around the mitigating action that we're taking to address the risks and how that affects the composition and nature of the risks.
Okay, I can certainly see the logic of not making a change now while you're trying to embed something. That certainly makes sense. I would very much, when this next comes up for review, and maybe in a year's time, I do think there needs to be better granularity. We have 5 risks, all of which are at varying degrees quite serious for the council, that are at the top score already. And that to me doesn't feel right. And I feel like a couple of those risks, particularly homelessness and cyber attack, I think if you had an extra layer would probably go up in score. The other 3, I'll be honest, I know less about in terms of the impact on the council, because we have had training around homelessness, and we obviously had a recent cyber incident. But I would think that would give that granularity of detail. And I absolutely take the point that that risk journey is important for councillors to see and hear, but I still want to, the committee's role here, we don't own the risk register. We're given assurance to Cabinet and CMT that we agree that the risks are being tracked properly and that they're being rated properly, but we're not digging into mitigations. We're not digging into, plans to bring these down. That's not our role. And so on this, I'm minded. I mean, I'd be interested in your sort of feedback on this. I'm minded to move a recommendation that does go to Cabinet and CMT to say at a future review that we do look to go to a 5x5 risk matrix, because I do think that granularity of detail will help us as members, as a minimum, understand that, and I think it will give CMT better overview.
Yes, agreed. As you said, we are more than happy to review this once we've embedded this a bit further. And again, as you've alluded to, that recommendation will be welcome, but as we said, for the rest of this year, the current risk matrix, getting it embedded and getting the reports absolutely right as well would be more of a key goal for us at the moment.
I mean, do any members have any strong views on this? I think not. Okay, I would leave it as a view from the chair then, rather than a view of the committee. That I think it's something we should probably pick up in a year's time.
Thank you.
Councillor Davis.
I just wanted to say I agree with you, Chair, but as we're talking a year off, then I thought,
Thank you. Okay, members, if there are no more comments, this is down to approve the review of corporate risks and the annex risks. Do I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Davis has proposed. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Faruqi. Are members agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 6, quarterly internal audit report update. Simon, can we have your report, please? Yeah, yes.
Is it possible, with the monitoring officer's blessing, that I can speak on this item?
Yes. So Simon introduces his report, and then we'll come to you, Councillor Yates. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This is our regular quarterly internal audit update report, summarising the work of the East Kent Audit Partnership on your behalf in the last quarter. If I can draw your attention to the table on page 51, you'll see that it summarises 7 new audits completed during this period, so a very busy quarter for us. We were very pleased to report either wholly or partially substantial assurance in 4 areas. Firstly, payroll. Clearly, the level of expenditure that goes through the payroll system is significant. Your staff are your biggest asset. So very pleased to report substantial assurance in that area with no recommendations. It really doesn't get any better from a risk management, internal control and corporate governance perspective than that. We also concluded substantial assurance with very few recommendations in the areas of treasury management and capital. So all credit to the finance team in those 2 areas. Community safety was largely substantial. We did split the assurance level, it was partially limited. There are some recommendations and control weaknesses surrounding reporting to members and performance indicators. Improvement is required there, but as I say, it was largely substantial assurance. Housing antisocial behaviour, also reasonable assurance. Again, some similar recommendations to the community safety audit, and indeed we did run those two audits alongside one another. Homelessness, obviously a very large area of expenditure for not just this council but nationally for most local authorities. Reasonable assurance generally, but we did again split the assurance level, so it is partially limited, and there were areas for improvement surrounding the use of temporary accommodation and the costs associated therewith. Finally, we undertook a review of external funding protocol. We did conclude limited assurance in that area. The protocol is dated 2015, so coming up for 9 years old, is in line for a review. Primarily, the reasons given rise to the limited assurance opinion, however, were to do with a lack of audit trail on the sample that we selected. Finance files were available, but it was really user departments and a lack of information readily available to us to enable us to conclude a higher assurance level in that area. I've mentioned before, as part of the quarterly update report, that a very important part of internal audit work, apart from the new audits, is follow-up work. About 3 to 6 months after each audit, we go back to see if the recommendations that we've made have been implemented. And if so, can the assurance level be increased? If I can ask you to look at the table on page 60 and turn the page onto page 61, that summarises the 8 follow-ups completed during this period. I won't go through all of them, but highlight a couple for your attention. Waste vehicle fleet management. We were disappointed with this one. It was reasonable assurance. We give very few no assurance opinions. We almost never decrease an assurance level at the time of follow-up. It was necessary on this occasion. My staff and I, during the course of the period between the original audit and the follow-up, witnessed 3 occasions where refuse freighters were reversing round corners without the guidance of a banksman, which is contrary to council policy. That is a significant risk to public health and safety, and it's also a risk in terms of the inconsistent application of the council's disciplinary procedures. It's an easy fix for the council, and we believe that the necessary measures have already been put in place, but it was disappointing to see that and to have to reduce the assurance level in that area. Eastern opportunities. It took a little while, but we were pleased to be able to increase the assurance level in that area from no assurance up to reasonable. Licensing. It was largely reasonable assurance at the time of the original audit. The no assurance related to the requirement to undertake a cost-neutral exercise to ensure that the licensing function doesn't make a profit, looking at a rolling 3-year cycle. We couldn't find any evidence that that exercise had been undertaken, and that was still the case at the time of follow-up. So the no assurance opinion is still valid in that area. Rent accounting, collection and debt management, largely reasonable at the time of the original audit. The limited opinion, however, related to the write-off of outstanding debts and the procedures surrounding that. Work was being undertaken, but the recommendations weren't sufficiently embedded at the time of follow-up to enable us to have the confidence to increase the assurance level from partially limited. The annexes to the report are the ones that you're probably becoming familiar with, as this quarterly report follows the same format each quarter. So Annex 1, which starts on page 65, shows the agreed 23-24 internal audit plan and our progress against it. As at 31st of December, we'd completed 70% of the plan against the target of 75%. We will be slightly behind schedule this year as we have had a vacancy for approximately 6 weeks. We have now filled that vacancy and are back up to full strength and are progressing well with the plan, but it's probably more likely to be about 92% as opposed to touching 100%. Also attached on page 67 is progress against the Civica EKS plan, which primarily covers areas such as benefits, revenues and customer services. Annex 3 shows the recommendations, high or critical recommendations that were still outstanding after follow-up. So, for example, the one on licensing and those relating to rent, write-off of debts. Appendix 4 is quite an important one. It shows those areas where we've concluded limited or no assurance and we've yet to undertake the follow-up. So that's there to keep it on the radar, and you will see them come forward to future meetings. So, for example, we're just about to finalise the car parking and enforcement follow-up, and that will come forward to the next meeting of this committee, which I think is early July. Last but not least, on pages 74 and 75, we have a balanced scorecard of performance indicators for the East Kent Audit Partnership ourselves. So that includes things such as completion of the audit plan, which, as I mentioned, is at 70% against the 75% target. And also details of the number of satisfaction questionnaires completed and the results of those customer satisfaction surveys. That concludes the presentation from myself, Chair, but obviously very happy to take any questions. And indeed, I think we have a number of officers present who might like to add any comments on any of the areas covered this evening. Thank you.
Okay, I'll come to you, Councillor Yates, and then if there's any officers that want to come in to make any explanations, they can do so.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to draw Councillor's attention to page 16 of Annex 1 on this report, which is just, it's not about the current audit that's been done, it's about an audit that was done last year, which was employee health and safety, which received a limited assurance. Now, from my side, I can't see the follow-up work within this report, and in the next agenda item, there's no budgeted days for employee health and safety to be done during the next year. So if councillors, did want to add a certain number of budget days onto that, that would be something I would fully support. Obviously, I don't want to lead members into suggestions, but ensuring adequate employee health and safety is a very large concern of mine, so I just want to highlight that now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for that question. You're quite right, employee health and safety is a very key area. We do still have the follow-up to undertake of that audit, so that will be undertaken in the next couple of months, and I'm sure that the follow-up will be coming to the July meeting. Equally, we're currently doing an audit of grounds maintenance, and certainly a large aspect of the scope of that audit will be an extensive drill down into employee health and safety procedures within the Dane Park Depot amongst the grounds maintenance team. So more than one audit sometimes covers associated risks. So here we're drilling down into the employee health and safety issues for grounds maintenance as part of a separate audit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll pick up that health and safety on the next agenda item, but thanks, Councillor Yates. Any other officers want to come in to explain anything before we open it up to questions from members? No? Okay, Councillor Kine, did you say you wanted to speak? Yes. Yeah, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Mann.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on one of the services that you highlighted in Appendix 4, which is page 23 of the report and page 73 of the pack. And that service is the planning applications, income and section 106, which was reported back at the November, so at our last meeting, I believe, with limited assurance, and the limited assurance did relate, if I remember correctly, to the section 106 part of this. So you are looking to do a follow-up review of that area. So I just wanted to make sure that that follow-up review is done in a timely manner. And what I mean by that is, I know there is a new officer who is preparing a report which on all contributions secured, received and spent under for section 106 agreements going back to 2019-2020 and for the follow-up years. And I think that had been due to be completed in December, but for various reasons, with staff shortages and various other reasons, which I understand, that's been put back, and I don't think that's now going to be ready until April or May to go to a cabinet meeting. So I would like the follow-up review, obviously would be best done after that report has been done, so that the audit can be done on what's presented in that report, so as we can then get a view of, you know, the contributions that have been secured and spent and all of that, rather than doing it before that report. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, come in, Simon.
Thank you, Councillor. Typically, follow-ups are timed based upon the dates that management have signed up to at the time of the original audit. That audit was presented to the November meeting of this committee. So typically, I would expect the follow-up to be probably March, April of this year, and then be reported to the July meeting of this committee. What you sometimes see, and you can probably see examples of this in Appendix 3 to this evening's report, which is the summary of critical and high recommendations still outstanding after follow-up. Those sometimes are recommendations where they haven't been achieved by the originally given dates, and you will see revised implementation dates. Now, depending upon the criticality of the service, what we might do is go back and do a second follow-up. We don't do many of them because we don't want to waste your money by going back and saying to you exactly what we said before. But it is a possibility. I would expect the planning follow-up, though, to come forward to the July meeting.
Just to clarify, I mean, I'm sure there's a way there would be a valuable way of liaising with management to make sure that when that review is done, it's done once that report has been completed, which will present all the information that's required for a valid review of the Section 106 agreements over the last 4 years and how that process has worked in relation to those agreements.
I mean, if I can just come in, but you may want to respond to that. I've had a couple of conversations with the chief executive recently to try and bring the work of managers more in with the work of internal audit. I know that Colin Carmichael has monthly meetings with Christine Parker, who works with Simon on internal audit. So I have trust that if there is a follow-up audit taking place, that officers will be aware of that and will be building that into their planning. But somebody else may want to reply or not. I'm sure we can pick that up with relevant people. Yeah, please. Yeah. Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Simon. I actually enjoy your presentations because they're kind of insightful and can be quite forensic, which is good. I've got two questions. Firstly, I hadn't realised that your audit was so focused on operations management as well as sort of the more sort of paperwork side of things. But how did we then miss this big heap of steaming dung in Dane Park Depot? It was a pretty obvious. It must have been obvious to anyone that knew what they were doing there that this was potentially an issue. Secondly, how does that impact on the governance side of things when the initial quote, I understand, was below the critical decision limit of 250. So we have a quote of 225, but then the invoice arrives for 275 with what looks like an absence of thorough process to get best value. So there's a couple of issues over that I'm curious about. The other thing that is just a completely separate issue is if you could just please explain on the licensing where you said there was a risk they might make a profit. Didn't quite follow that. Is that the fact that licensing should be cost neutral? So do we have a handle on what, have we worked out apportioned costs? Do we know what it costs to run the various licensing departments, and do we know what the revenue is, and how we should fix the tariffs accordingly? Thanks.
Simon, do you want to come in on the first and the third point? It may be good for you to come in on that second one, Chris, or the relevant ones. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, in terms of grounds maintenance, we have only just started the audit. The last audit we would have undertaken would be 3 years ago. So the pile of rubbish has appeared during that period. So I can't really comment on that beyond that. In terms of licensing, yes, it's a cost-neutral function. There are others, such as building control. We're not supposed to make a profit out of it, and we are required to undertake a cost-neutral exercise to verify that we're not making a profit, and we look at it over a rolling 3-year cycle, and fees and charges should be set with that in mind.
Thanks. The second part of the question on Dane Park was how it affected the governance side of things, because it just seemed like an emergency decision for an extraordinary amount of money.
Councillor Manners, can I just, I think one of the officers was going to answer that specific point.
Great, okay.
Do you want to come in, Chris, or another officer?
Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, I can come in on that now. So the £250,000 limit's the key decision limit if we think expenditure is going to exceed that amount in an annual period. Obviously, we don't always know when we commission a piece of work how much it's going to cost. So the way we work around that is you have to apply the key decision limit to what you reasonably can expect the cost to exceed at that point in time, which is the limit that an officer can approve up to. If through the actual undertaking the work comes to light that it's in excess of that, that's when we then need to get members involved to get the decision to approve the expenditure. But the decision to award the contract was completely compliant with our governance procedures and our contract standing orders, because at the point in time that we placed the order, we anticipated reasonably that it would be below that key decision threshold. There may be, I'm not sure if Ingrid or Mike wants to comment on that any further, because they were more directly involved with it than I was.
Well, just to reiterate exactly what you said, Chris, the understanding was, and obviously, although this matter had been an ongoing issue for some time, obviously it was only brought to our attention, as in those sitting here, and the Tony Marmo, who's presented a report on this matter earlier to overview and scrutiny and subsequently to Cabinet. It was only brought to his attention in October. So it was urgent, and so officers responded really promptly and really swiftly, and and in good faith that the amount quoted, but there was some, there was some uncertainty. It was an imperative to act swiftly, but also knowing that there was some uncertainty as the types of waste that were actually stored, and we knew that would have an impact on cost. But in good faith, it was thought to be below the amount was thought to be below the threshold. And obviously, when the contractor got in and was able to complete the work, then that was unfortunately found not to be the case, and so the matter was brought through the proper processes. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Mike.
Thank you. No, the point about not knowing until they did the work the proportion of waste types that you've already mentioned, Ingrid, that's the important point, I think, yes. So when the quotation came in, it was based on an assumption, based on a visual inspection of the waste, and only when they started to pick it up, collect it, dispose of it, were we able to be better informed as to the proportion of waste that could be treated in different ways, so whether that's green waste or whether that's general waste. And as you've said, Ingrid, that is the thing that's changed the value of the work, sort of post completion.
Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. Just before I ask the question I was going to, if I could just confirm with Mike, so you're saying it wasn't all green waste there, Mike? There was mixed waste there that couldn't be composted and so on? Because one of the things that I was, and members of the public who were former employees have been quite vexed about, is that at one time Brazils would have taken that had it been chipped and composted it, and they'd have taken it free of charge. Then Thanet Waste. Neither of those have been used. We've used MERS at vast cost. What I couldn't reconcile was why. And so you're now telling us that it wasn't all green compostable waste. This was contaminated waste that had been stored there. Is that right?
Mike.
Sorry.
No, I'm not saying it's contaminated. I'm saying it's not all green. It wasn't all green waste. So there's other waste. I mean, soil, for example, soil can't be disposed of as green waste. So. Yeah.
Members, apologies. Can I just pull us back onto the agenda a little bit? This is a little bit of a tangent, which I think has been fine. I think there's some good questions asked, but this report has been considered by Overview and Scrutiny and Cabinet. If you want to go to your question, I will bring you back in, Councillor Manners, but I think we need to draw a line under it there.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I don't mean to die. It's just clarification while we're there. I'm going to come back onto page, I think it was 73, wasn't it? Was it? Yeah, page 73. We're back onto berth 4 and 5, so we're back onto piles of rubbish, actually. But the post-implementation review that is ongoing, that's being conducted, that's an internal process, I believe, Simon. Are Grant Thornton still following through on their review of this project, or is this now purely internal? And I just wondered if somebody could clarify, because on the follow-up action due box, it says summer 2024, delayed at client request. Who's the client and why have they requested that? Project management risk being tolerated, I understand, but I want to clarify who is the client, what is the stage of the post-implementation review, and is that an internal matter only or a Grant Thornton involved?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. In terms of who is the client is Thanet District Council, so the request would be from management. We're not really engaging with Grant Thornton in any way on this one. This was a review that we undertook, a post-implementation review for the client, Thanet District Council, of berth 4-5. We are ready to undertake the follow-up as soon as management are ready. I don't know if either Chris or Mike want to come in on that.
Yeah, Chris.
To my knowledge, so the way they would typically consider items such as berth 4-5 would be that an objection is submitted by a local elector, a resident, that would state there's a value for money issue, then they want the external auditors to investigate it. My understanding is that that work has been completed in relation to the latest set of accounts that we've had value for money opinions up to our 22-23. So that's all been concluded. However, there could still be some expenditure that is incurred in 23-24 and 24-25 possibly, and then someone could still, in theory, still submit an objection which Grant Thornton may, in due course, decide they wish to look at. So there's no current extant matters that GT are looking at, but I can't say with complete certainty that there wouldn't be something that looked at in the future. Until we completely finish the project and there's no more expenditure, there's always still the chance that may happen, but I'm not expecting any further work from Grant Thornton on that matter.
No, thanks, Chris. It's really appreciated, because I've been asked by a few members of the public where we're at with this, because it's such a convoluted and messy process, or not the process that the guys are going through, but it's been a mess, the whole thing. So, thank you.
Councillor Mendes, do you want to come in? Apologies if I missed you on the follow-up before.
No problem. Thanks, Bill. I recognise that this isn't the right forum to go digging down onto the issues at Dane Park, but whilst we have Simon in the room with us, are you? I mean, I know there's been a lot of changes with senior officers, and we've not had the right number of people in office. There's been a lot of vacant posts there, so I understand that things can be overlooked. But I'll just ask you a question really. Given your sort of your audit procedures that you've been through, are you generally happy that there's no other hidden surprises out there along the Dane Park? And obviously the way of finding that is do we have an open process, an amnesty, if you will, or a whistleblowing policy where if officers or employees feel that there are any historic issues lurking, that they're brought to the fore and dealt with before the problem festers or and gets worse?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of whistleblowing, yes, the council, like all other councils, has a whistleblowing policy. It is used. People do come to us and speak to us off the record, and we do investigate their concerns. That does happen. In terms of are there any other problems lurking out there, I think that's too big a question really for me to be able to answer. I'm sure that there are problems. Whether they're of the magnitude of that, I really couldn't say.
One more, Councillor Manners, and then we're going to move on.
Thanks, Simon. I mean, it does seem that things have improved significantly recently with TDC, with Colin Carmichael running the show. So I just wanted to really reiterate that we should have an open process where people feel comfortable if there are issues, historic issues, that they feel should be brought to the fore, so that we can get on with improving things in Thanet. So I'd hope that that's a priority that everybody understands.
Thank you very much. If there are no other comments from members, then we will go back to the recommendations. So the recommendations are that the report be received by councillors, and that any changes to the agreed 23-24 internal audit plan resulting from a change in perceived risk detailed at point 5 of Annex 1 of the attached report be approved. We haven't suggested any. Can I have a proposer and a seconder for the recommendations, please? Councillor Donaldson has proposed and Councillor Towning has seconded. Are members agreed? Okay. We will move on to agenda item 7, draft internal audit plan 24-25, and that's with you again, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. For us, this is a very important agenda item. It is the proposed internal audit plan for 24-25, so it sets our programme of work for the forthcoming 12 months. If I can draw your attention to the plan itself, which starts on page 83. If you've been serving on this committee for a number of years, you will possibly be familiar with the format. It's one we've been using for a while and seems to work well. As part of the planning process, I meet individually with all directors and all heads of service to discuss the proposed plan and to discuss emerging risks and opportunities that may arise in their service area over the forthcoming 12 months. Looking at the plan area essentially is what we term the audit universe. It's all areas of the council's business that we think are reasonably and meaningfully able to be audited. And we break them down into headings such as financial governance, people management, corporate governance, etc. We've shown cross-reference into the corporate statement and the priorities therein, because that is what we are all here to deliver, the corporate statement and the priorities for the residents of this district. And the audit process should help achieve that by providing assurance on the processes of risk management, internal control and corporate governance in each area or sector of the council's business. So for each area, we show the year we last did the audit, what the previous assurance level was, and that's been updated if it's gone up after follow-up, and then the number of days we are proposing for 24-25. In accordance with SIPA guidance, we're only asking you to approve a one-year plan, and that is for 24-25. We then show the draft quarterly prioritisation of when roughly we are going to do the audits. Having said it's a one-year plan, we do like to try and provide you with assurance that over a 4-year cycle we are covering all areas of the council's business. We are largely able to achieve that objective. There's a couple of areas which are highlighted in yellow that are falling just outside of a 4-year cycle, but they don't give us too many sleepless nights. Just going back up slightly within the report, on page 79, as well as the council's corporate statement and the associated corporate risk register, we also have regard to national issues and national risks which are emerging. We've listed 5 there. Those 5 haven't actually changed very much in recent years. They're drawn from an IIA, which is the Institute of Internal Audit, publication called Risk in Focus. Probably won't be surprised to see cybersecurity is the number 1 risk. It's been the number 1 risk for about the last 4 or 5 years. We try and undertake quite a lot of ICT audits. We'll be talking later this evening about the recent audit of cybersecurity. Next year we are proposing further work, not only a follow-up to that audit, but other ICT audits such as acquisitions and disposals, data management, etc. Human capital, diversity, talent management. I mentioned earlier when talking about payroll, clearly the staff are your biggest asset. They are within just about any organisation. Therefore, a fair bit of internal audit work will surround human capital, whether it is audits of payroll, which we do annually, apprenticeships, employee benefits in kind. Those audits are planned for 24-25. Obviously, in recent years, there's been a fair bit of macroeconomic and geopolitical uncertainty. I think I can guarantee that probably that will carry on. Whether it's COVID, whether it is the Middle East, whether it is the Ukraine, and the impact that has on supply chain and things of that sort. Climate change, clearly sadly that is with us as for the foreseeable future as well. And we do plan an annual audit of climate change to assess where the council is with tackling climate change, and we review that against your own action plan. I mentioned supply chain outsourcing. We do quite a bit on procurement, tendering, contract management, etc. So they are the 5 main risks that the Institute of Internal Auditors at a national level think we should be concentrating on, and I hope that the report demonstrates how we are tackling them within the plan. Looking at the plan itself, as I mentioned, it's broken down: financial governance, people management, counter fraud, etc. To preempt some of the questions that you may have, for example, you may ask if it's no assurance or limited assurance shown in the previous assurance level, why aren't we doing an audit in 24-25? Well, typically the answer to that will be, for example, we've still got a follow-up to do. So if we look at the first 2 that jump out at me, car parking and enforcement, no assurance, we are doing the follow-up at present. That is fairly well advanced. That will certainly come to the July meeting. I know most of the recommendations have been implemented. I'm just waiting to find out if it's going up from no. I suspect it is. I'm just not sure if it's limited or reasonable. External funding protocol, well, that audit was in the quarterly report for this meeting. Therefore, obviously, the follow-up is still to be undertaken. Employee health and safety, we mentioned. The follow-up, again, is still to be undertaken. I also mentioned that typically we only do one follow-up. We don't want to waste your money by keep coming back and doing follow-ups. Really, that is where the recommendation tracker will start to come into force. So that once we've done a follow-up, if recommendations are still outstanding, then management will monitor those and advise when they've been implemented. And I think that you're going to receive a recommendation tracker report twice a year to this committee. There are 3 areas that fall outside of a 4-year cycle. Local Code of Corporate Governance, printing and post, neither of those cause me any great concerns. Leasehold services, we would have liked to have done. However, there is a new system being implemented during the course of 24-25. I think it's a new module of the Northgate system. Accordingly, 24-25 wouldn't really work for an audit. So I think we'll probably look at early 25-26, and that will be in next year's plan. Probably the last thing to say to me before I open it up to questions, Chair, is as well as the Thanet plan, on page 88 and 89, we also have the residual plan for EKS and Civica in terms of housing benefit, council tax, business rates, etc. As you would expect, we do a lot of work on that because of the amount of money that goes through there. I talk about reviewing every area in a 4-year cycle. Some areas get done a lot more often than that. ICT will have aspects of it done every year. Payroll will be audited every year because with payroll the controls don't necessarily change. We do a lot of transactional testing and also try and use data analytics to search for things that need further investigation, such as duplicate national insurance numbers, duplicate bank accounts. Could be a good reason for that. Could have husband and wife both working at the authority. They've got the same bank account. Duplicate national insurance numbers could be that somebody's got 2 posts in the authority. Could be good reasons. Could be something that needs looking at. So yeah, housing benefits, council tax, we break them down like ICT into constituent parts and try and ensure that we do an aspect of it each and every year. And some other areas we try and approach in a different way. It's a bit like if the control weakness is a worm in an apple, you might slice that apple and not find the worm. If you slice it multiple ways, eventually you're going to find the worm. On that note, I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive introduction. Before I bring you in, Councillor Faruqi and Councillor Davis, just want to be clear, members, on our role here. I believe, my understanding is that the actual internal audit schedule is agreed by officers and internal audit. We can make suggestions, but we can't insist that the audit plan is changed. So Councillor Faruqi, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Davis.
Thank you very much for that. Just a point of clarification, the follow-ups that you advised that are pending, are those accounted for out of last year's budget, or is that incorporated in this year's budget? How are we funding those follow-ups?
Thank you, Councillor. It's a very good question. There's a provision of 15 days within the plan to undertake follow-up. Typically, we try and contain a follow-up to 1 day, but it does very much depend upon the number of recommendations. If you've got a no assurance area with a lot of critical recommendations, and we test every high and critical recommendation to verify that it's been implemented, then that can take more than a day. Medium and low recommendations, we will accept management's assurance that it's been implemented. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And notwithstanding what you said, I know we're not here as a decision-making body. And far be it from me, because I think you're doing an excellent job, and thank you for your feedback, Simon, with internal audit. Quite a simple question, because it's how do the amount of days allocated to the different projects, are they allocated by yourselves, or is that steered by the council? There's a reason I ask, which I'll come back to, but...
It's based upon our audit experience. Most of the audits we undertake are about 10 days. What I ask of our team is the best possible job you can do in 10 days. Typically, they're going to find most of the control weaknesses, if there are any, in 10 days. Doing a 20-day audit, you don't get that much more value for money out of it. So the number of days is set by us. But things do go over budget. Sometimes there's a good reason for that. If we start to find a lot of problems, then we will allocate more time to it. One thing I would say about the plan is it is not set in stone and it will change. Quite rightly, it moves with risks and opportunities as they evolve through the course of the year. Christine and I will meet with Chris and with Matt on a quarterly basis. Indeed, we chat much more often than that, but formally we meet quarterly to discuss progress against the plan and any new areas that might need to come into the plan, and if so, what is going to come out of the plan to make way for it. That is then reported to you on a quarterly basis. Going back to the quarterly update report, there was the table showing progress against the plan. Within that, you'll see some audits have been postponed, and also there's a heading for reactive work, where we're undertaking unplanned work because it's deemed to be of a higher risk than some of the planned work. So I hope that answers the question, Councillor.
No, thank you very much, Simon, and again, all respect for the job you do, because it must be like the Wheel of Fortune. Just as you come over the top, we're off again, because it's a never-ending process. What drew this to my attention was page 87, and it's about the accounts for Ramsgate Harbour and the port, because 5 days are allocated year on year, it seems. However, several times where we've tried to access information, for example, the maintenance costs over the last 6 years for berths 2 and 3, Matt unfortunately couldn't extract that because of the way the records are kept, and there wasn't an independent figure for the maintenance costs there. I think, given the experiences and what, and this is an opinion which, however, there is an ongoing situation, let's say, with berths 4 and 5. There's questions being asked about the costs on berths 1 and 2 and so on, and a lot of debate around the port and harbour. Would it, and yet we've allowed 10 days for members' allowances and expenses, which is a pretty static figure, really, and repeating. I just wondered why we'd got double the resource into auditing that, as opposed to something that's as mired as some of the projects at the port.
Thank you, Chair. The Ramsgate Harbour accounts are literally a fairly simple set of accounts for that entity. It's probably not the detailed drill down that perhaps you're anticipating. We certainly undertake other audits of port activity, whether it is visiting yachts, permanent yachts, the port activity itself in terms of any income due to us from those operations. I don't know if Mike or Matt's got his hand up, so...
Thanks, Simon. Just to be clear, Grant Thornton used to audit the Port and Harbour accounts. What this is we produce the corporate set of accounts, and over and above there is a requirement to produce a set of separate accounts to the Department of Transport every year for them to hold on file. What internal audit are doing is what Grant Thornton used to do at a lower and more efficient rate, as Simon would say, is audit that set of accounts to make sure they present a true, accurate, fair reflection of the transactions that are put through. So that's why it's only 5 days, and that's why it's every year, because it is that basic principle in terms of auditing the accounts. Is everything contained within there? Is it accurate? Are there any material misstatements? That's why they're like that.
Thanks, Matt. It's interesting because, as I say, that's why it jumped out at me that we've got twice the amount of time for members' allowances and so on, which most of us don't claim the flexible, mileage allowance and that. So it's a pretty static figure, and I was just surprised that it takes twice as much time to audit as something that should, by the sounds of it, be a lot more complex in its content than the Port and Harbour is, because it's actually not a simple situation, and this is possibly how we've ended up where we are. But thank you very much, and thank you for your good work, and it's a privilege to talk to you.
Councillor Manners.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, another one for Simon, but somewhat a little bit similar to John, about the priorities in allocating obviously a finite resource in terms of number of hours to each of these tasks. I was just querying why parking isn't going to be audited until 25-26, when I recall in the last meeting we were told that parking and enforcement had no confidence, and that's obviously quite a large amount of money involved in parking, on-road parking revenue, and why that couldn't be looked at sooner, or whether there were plans to audit that sooner to see how improvements are being made in parking and enforcement.
Thank you, Councillor. The follow-up to that audit is currently underway, literally this week. I probably expect to receive the draft for review probably by the end of this week. It will definitely be coming to the July meeting.
So we've got a report coming already. Yeah. Can I also just pick up on the comment that Councillor Yates made on the previous agenda item? Obviously, Simon, you said that there was a follow-up audit taking place on health and safety. Can I maybe, if the committee is supportive of that if there are any continuing areas of no assurance or any recommendations coming out of that we maybe include more time next year? So it's almost because I think if we miss our opportunity now to flag this as a concern, we won't get this report to come back for another year. So if the committee sort of supported, do you want to comment on that, Chris?
Just to give you a little bit more context, that the progress that we're making against implementing those recommendations, they'll be brought to corporate management team in a week's time, and then it'll be actually going on to the informal meeting of Cabinet CMT. So it's something we're very much looking at as a live issue and aspiring to get all those recommendations cleared by the time the follow-up's completed.
Okay, and then just in case you aren't able to,
very much so.
We'll make a suggestion, if the committee's supportive, that if by July there are still outstanding recommendations that we would like included in the annual internal audit plan, some more time allocated to that. Are members supportive of that? Okay, thank you very much. If there are no more comments from everyone, we will go to the recommendations, and the recommendations are that we have received the report and that we approve it. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Davis proposed, Councillor Manners has seconded. Are members agreed? Okay, members, agenda item 8 is for the exclusion of the public and the press. This is something we have tried to avoid as much as possible, but for me, the public interest here is outweighed by the risk of disclosing information, particularly as in this audit report. There are some security provisions that are pertinent to potentially ongoing incidents or recent incidents. So I will propose from the chair, and I'll be looking for a seconder, that we do exclude the press and public. Can I have a seconder, please? I'll take Councillor Faruqi on that one. Are members agreed? Okay. So we're just going to pause for a moment just to stop the live stream of the meeting. So members, for a second.